When I was first developing the Protea capsule wardrobe sewing pattern, I desperately wanted to include 3 tiers in the View C dress and the View E skirt. But the tricky thing about designing sewing patterns is trying to find a happy balance between design, ease of construction, and fabric consumption. Though a 3-tier skirt fulfilled my design ideals, it did increase the difficulty of sewing a bit and completely threw out fabric consumption. So I couldn't bring myself to do it. Until now. Years after the release, I had a realization. I don't need to add a 3rd tier to make a 3-tier skirt. I can just make a smaller 1st tier, which will use much less fabric and won't require gathering 5 additional skirt panels. So that's what we'll be doing today. Hi, I'm Megan Nielsen and I design easy-to-use sewing patterns for everyday wearable pieces that you can make yourself. Let's get sewing! Okay, the first thing we need to do is decide what size to cut. I recommend choosing your size based on the larger of your waist or your hip size. So for me, my waist would put me in a size 8, but my hip would put me in a size 14. So I'm cutting a 14. This is important because the design of this additional tier is close fitting, so you need to make sure it isn't tight on you. If you are at all worried about this or prefer more volume, you can add more to the pattern width easily. Now to work on our pattern pieces. We'll need the skirt 8, which we'll cut at the tiered skirt cut line, and the pocket 9, and we'll cut 4 as per usual. To make the first tier, we'll be adjusting the waistband pattern piece 11 to create a first tier and waistband combined. To make this really easy, we'll just be adding 23 centimeters or 9 inches to the bottom edge of the waistband. The reason for this length is to be able to fit the pockets comfortably in that first panel. However, you might find this a bit long if you have a short torso. So if you do, I would recommend reducing the length by 5 centimeters or 2 inches. If you'd like to add pockets like I did, then you'll need to include pocket notches. These will be placed 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch and 15.5 centimeters or 6 1/8 of an inch down from the side seam. Don't forget that the original waistband was cut on the fold and we're cutting 2 panels, so we need to add 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch to the center front. See, I almost forgot to do this. You'll need to cut 5 skirt tiers, just like View E in the pattern, and 4 pockets. You'll also cut 2 of the new first tier waistband combined. This will result in a first tier which is somewhat close fitting and almost a drop waist look, and will use up much less fabric than a 3rd tier would have used, which would have been 5 extra panels for the skirt. If you prefer more volume in your first tier, feel free to add that to the pattern piece's width before cutting. Okay, let's get sewing. I like to work on pockets first, so let's finish the raw edges of the curved outer edges of our pockets. I'm using an overlocker. Place your pockets right side together on the front and back waistband tier panels. Make sure that you align your pocket notches with your waistband tier. Be careful here and make sure you have your waistband tier the right way round. It's really easy to put this upside down and it just won't work upside down. I like to lay out my panels side by side so I can make sure my pockets align well with each other. Sew the pockets to the side seams just under 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge. Finish the raw edges by your design method, and again, I'm overlocking them. Press the pockets and the seams away from the garment and understitch the pocket to the seam allowance. Understitching is a very important step in my opinion, as it makes sure that the pocket and the seam allowance stay in place together and are less likely to peek out on the right side of the garment. Place your 2 waistband tier panels right sides together and so that the pockets are aligned. Sew around the curved outer edge of the pocket 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge, stopping at the side seam. Sew the side seam down from the top of the waistband until the first pocket notch. Stop and backstitch. Sew the rest of the side seam up from the bottom of the waistband tier panel and ending at the second pocket notch and backstitching. You will not sew between the pocket notches as this is your pocket opening. Press your pockets and seams towards the front of your garment. You get to choose which side is the front and then pin them in place. Turn in 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge at the top of the waistband and press. Turn in 4 centimeters or 1 5/8 of an inch and pin in place. This will be your elastic casing for your waistband. Make sure that the top edge of your pockets are inside that waistband casing. They should overlap by 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. Sew along the edge of the waistband all the way around and leave a small gap for threading your elastic through. Now let's leave this to the side and work on the skirt panels. We cut 5 skirt panels. 2 will be used for the second tier and 3 will be used for the third tier. For the second tier, place the 2 skirt panels right sides together and sew 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge along each side seam. Press your seams to the side. To gather, set your sewing machine to the longest stitch length and sew 2 rows of basting stitches around the top edge of the panel. The first row of basting will be 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch from the edge, and the second row of basting will be 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the edge. It can be quite cumbersome to gather a very large width of fabric, so I prefer to gather in sections. With right sides together, align the top edge of the second skirt tier to the bottom edge of the waistband tier. Pin the side seams together. Secure one side of the threads by winding in a figure 8 around your pin. On the other side, gently tug at the 2 threads whilst holding the fabric stationary to gather up the fabric. Once your gathered edge is the same width as the first panel edge, secure your threads. Even out your gathers as best you can and pin in place. Do the same on the second panel. Sew the gathered panels to the waistband tier by sewing 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge. Finish the raw edges by your preferred method and press the seams up away from the gathers. If you have visible basting stitches on the right side of the garment, it's a good idea to unpick them now before you forget. Now for the third tier. The third tier is made up of 3 panels. Place the 3 panels right sides together and pin the seam edges in place so that you have one big tube. For fabric economy, this pattern uses a gather ratio of 1.5 in the third tier. However, if you have enough fabric, cutting a 4th panel and sewing 4 panels together will create a lovely amount of volume with a gather ratio of 2. As with the second row, you'll need to sew some basting. But before we do that, we need to section our tier into 4 sections. I like to choose one seam as the center back and place a safety pin there. Now fold your tube in half to determine the other quarter markings and mark those with safety pins too. I use safety pins as markers because by the time you are gathering this much, it can be cumbersome and pins can fall out. Make sure that you also split your second tier hem into quarters as well and mark with safety pins. This should be easier as you should have seams at the 2 sides and you can place safety pins at the center front and center back. Sew 2 rows of basting stitches as we did before between the safety pins. This will result in 4 sections of gathers at the top edge of the third tier, which you will gather into 4 sections on the bottom edge of the second tier. Now that there are a lot of gathered panels, you can either do what we did before and gather each panel separately, pin in place, and then sew the whole seam at once. Or you can do what I prefer, which is to gather and pin one section, sew that section to secure it, and then repeat for each section of gathering. I like this as it means that each section of gathering and sewing is relatively small, and when I'm working on a new section, it's very secure and I don't have to worry about pinned gathers falling apart. With right sides together, sew each panel of the third tier to the bottom edge of the second tier, 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge. Finish the raw edges by your desired method and press the seams up away from the gathers. We are so close to finishing now. To hem your skirt, turn in 1 centimeter at the hem and press. Then turn in 1 centimeter once more and press. Sew the skirt hem just under 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the hemline all the way around the skirt. Press once more. For the waistband, you'll need to measure your natural waist and cut a piece of 32mm or 1 1/4 inch elastic to match your waist measurement. Attach a safety pin to one end of the elastic and use that to thread the elastic through the casing. When you reach the other side, overlap the 2 pieces of elastic by 2.5 centimeters or an inch and sew them together. Now is a great time to try on your skirt and test if that elastic is comfortable fit for you, so you can adjust it before closing the waistband. Stretch your waistband a few times to evenly distribute the elastic. Sew the waistband opening closed. This step is optional, but I think makes all the difference to a professional look and comfortable skirt. Set your sewing machine to a long stitch length, stretching your waistband as you sew 2 rows of top stitching around the entire waistband through the elastic to secure your elastic to the waistband. I like to sew mine 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch down from the top edge and 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch up from the bottom edge. Head over to the iron and steam your waistband to help the elastic recover and go back into shape. You'll notice your waistband shrink up a bit here. If you're attaching a label to the back, I personally like to do it now as I don't like the look of a gathered label and I don't mind the 2 inches at the back of my skirt being a little less stretchy. Well, that's it. Now you have a 3-tier drop waist skirt that uses significantly less fabric than a 3-tier skirt usually would. And it has pockets. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you have any questions at all, let me know in the comments. Happy sewing!